Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Impossible Turn series. My name is Daniel Schwartz, and today we'll be demonstrating the effect of headwind on our ability to successfully complete the impossible turn. We're going to start off with a 5-knot headwind and increase that in increments of 5 until we were able to successfully attempt the impossible turn. As you can see, we've just taken off runway 16 left at Manassas Regional Airport here in a Cessna 172S with G1000. Our weight and balance profiles in the description below. This configuration off runway 16 left makes the impossible turn a little bit more difficult, as we've mentioned before, because of the offset thresholds on the departure end. Our simulated engine failure will once again occur at 1,000 feet AGL with a 3 to 4 second delay following the engine failure. And as we discovered in yesterday's video, if you turn at a 45-degree bank angle, the Cessna 172S can successfully land on taxiway Bravo had we make its turn to the left. But with 5 knots of headwind, can we make runway 34 left? We're at our best glide speed of 68 knots, and we'll ride that all the way in. And right now our 5-knot headwind has become a 5-knot tailwind, pushing us back towards the runway. That's why headwind can help in this scenario, but it looks like 5 knots is not quite enough to get a Cessna 172S back to runway 34 left. See, we're adding in some notches of flaps. It extends our glide, gets us a little bit closer to the runway, but we are not going to make it. We stall out. So right now we have a 10-knot headwind. Let's review why a headwind would help us in the scenario of needing to make the impossible turn. If you have a headwind as we're taking off, as we're climbing out, the headwind is actually pushing us back towards the runway, so the distance we gain away from the airport is reduced. Plus, once we've turned around, that headwind becomes a tailwind, effectively pushing us back towards the runway. All of our other parameters are exact same as we were in a no-wind scenario. We're climbing out around VY, 75 knots in this airplane. We're going to use a 45-degree bank turn, as we discovered in the previous video, is the most optimum configuration to help us get back towards the runway. But now we just have that extra wind. Pushing the nose over, getting to a 45-degree bank, and pitching for 68 knots, best glide. So in our previous videos where we had no wind, we were flying at 68 knots and our speed over the ground was 68 knots. In this scenario, we now have a 10-knot tailwind. So our speed over the ground, instead of 68, is 78 knots, and so we travel back towards the runway a lot faster. This one looks a lot better. This is the best shot we've ever had in this airplane getting back to runway 34 left. Already we have blown through all of our glide paths, so we're adding in some flaps to extend our glide. And we touch down on the numbers. So because we barely made it in that scenario, we didn't even make it past the numbers with full flaps, we're going to give it one more shot. Right now we have a 15-knot headwind, and if 10 knots allowed us to barely make the runway, certainly 15 wouldn't hurt. Let's see what happens. 55 knots, rotate, and you'll notice we get to 55 knots with a lot shorter ground roll. That's because we have that extra air flowing over the wings from that direct headwind right down the runway. In this airplane we seem to get about 700 to 800 feet per minute climb at our speed of 75 knots. as we discussed yesterday, pushing the nose over and going to a 45-degree bank angle. The 45-degree bank angle will rob the most altitude in a turn compared to shallower banks, but that shorter radius helps you get back towards the runway with an overall shorter distance, and that's what matters most. Now that we've leveled the wings at 68 knots, our descent rate in this airplane at best glide is about 900 feet per minute, and you can see that 15-knot tailwind now. Absolutely guaranteed we will make the runway. In fact, we had to add in, there you go, add in a couple notches of flaps. So somewhere between 10 knots and 15 knots of headwind is the magic number for a Cessna 172S in these conditions at this weight and balance profile to make it back to runway 34 left. Otherwise, just make a left turn and land on taxiway Bravo. So now that we learned that 10 to 15 knots of headwind is the magic number for a Cessna 172S to successfully perform the impossible turn, let's see what happens with the Cherokee 180. So far, the Cherokee 180 has been the poorest performing airplane, has these short little stubby wings, only a 30-foot wingspan compared to the 36 of the Skyhawk and 35 of the Archer II. And once again, we started off with 5 knots of headwind. In any attempt, this airplane has never even made taxiway Bravo with a turn to the left. So we're going to see if 5 knots of headwind can help us even do that. Climbing out between 85 and 90 miles an hour, just slightly above VY. There's the engine failure with a slight delay. Intercept about 82 miles an hour of our best glide speed, 45-degree bank angle. And this airplane, with a 45-degree bank, 82 miles an hour is very close to the stalling speed, so we have to be careful with that. Once we roll the wings level, you can see that vertical speed rockets back up. About a 900 foot per minute descent rate in this airplane also at best glide. And it looks like 5 knots of headwind is all we needed. 5 knots of headwind, and we easily make taxiway Bravo. So 5 knots is all it took for this airplane to make taxiway Bravo. Let's see if 5 knots of headwind also allows us to make runway 34 left. There's 70 miles an hour. That's about a 700 foot per minute climb rate, 7 to 800 foot per minute climb rate in this plane as well. Has a very similar engine to both the Archer II and the 172S, 180 horsepower. Alright, push the nose over. We actually undershot our best glide speed a little bit, so we have to dive back down to get it. And as we've discussed before, that's an issue with the Pipers, is that our climb speed and our glide speed are pretty close. So once you lose that engine, that airspeed decreases and you undershoot your best glide. Alright, coming back in, 82 miles an hour, 900 foot per minute descent with a 5 knot tailwind, and looks like there is just no way. So we'll have to go to a 10 knot headwind, see if that'll help us make 3-4 left. This is the closest we've got with this airplane, though. You can see adding in those notches of flaps extends our glide, but we're still 1,000 feet away. Now we have a 10 knot headwind. So once again, the best glide airspeed in this airplane is 82 miles an hour, converted to knots is 71 knots. With a 10 knot tailwind, turning back around, our ground speed should be 81 knots. Now, even though we've shown that these Pipers do not glide super well, I actually find them a very satisfying airplane to fly in real life, especially if you can do an emergency landing maneuver and successfully attempt one, or show that you would have successfully landed in the field that you selected. Doing that in an airplane that does not glide very well is a little bit more satisfying, in my opinion. Alright, once again, this is the best shot we've had. We're starting to blow through our glide paths. Want to get down closer to the ground into our ground effect before we deploy the flaps. I'm going to deploy every notch of flaps we have. And just barely we make it to the piano keys. So we barely make it to the piano keys with 10 knots of headwind. So we'll try with 15 to see if we can make a more definitive success. "70 knots, you can see once again it's cut our ground roll by several hundred feet with that headwind. An onlooker on the ground might think that an airplane with a headwind is climbing better, but as you can see, we're still climbing at 800 feet per minute. Our climb rate has not improved at all. It's the exact same as with no wind. But because that headwind is pushing us back towards the runway, we're gaining more altitude over a shorter distance. So to an onlooker, it looks like the airplane's actually climbing better. Smoothly roll into a 45-degree bank turn. So with a 15 knot tailwind, our ground speed on the way back in this time should be 86 knots. And here you go. This looks much more definitive. We actually had to add a notch of flaps to help us get down. So this plane also, the Cherokee 180 also, just like the 172S, needs somewhere between a 10 and 15 knot headwind to successfully make it back to runway 34 left. And you just need 5 knots of headwind in this airplane to make it to taxiway Bravo. Last but not least, the Archer II. Now the Archer II successfully landed on taxiway Bravo in a no-wind scenario, so we'll see how much headwind is required to make it to runway 34 left. Starting off once again with a 5 knot headwind. There's 60 knots, rotate. And this airplane climbing out between 75 and 80 knots, VY is 76. And this airplane is the easiest to undershoot your best glide speed because VY and best glide are the exact same, 76 knots. So losing the engine in a climb, gotta be real careful of that airspeed. 45-degree bank turn, 76 knots. So our ground speed should be 81 knots coming back in, about a 900 foot per minute descent with this airplane as well. Somewhere between 800 and 900 feet per minute. Starting to blow through our glide paths. Looks like we'll have to use some flaps here too. There you go. Start deploying the flaps and ground effect, extending our glide. Will we make it? Barely. Landed on the numbers. Now we're going to try a 10 knot headwind, see if we can make it a little bit more certain. I want us to be able to definitively land beyond the numbers. Because any slight change in technique, any slight deviation from your best glide speed, a slightly longer delay after the engine failure, and you are not making that runway. I must say, I love these Pipers. They just fly so nice. And their bulkier cousin, the Arrow, has a reputation for being a real brick when it comes to gliding. So, these airplanes with poor glide ratios, while you'd always want an airplane that glides super well, again, being able to successfully fly and manipulate the airplane to put it where you want it in an emergency situation is very satisfying. Alright, putting in 1 notch of flaps, that's always a good sign. If we need flaps to help ourselves get down, that's definitely a good sign. And easily this time we make it to runway 34 left. So somewhere between 5 and 10 knots of headwind for the Archer 2 is what you need to make 34 left, and you don't need any wind to successfully make taxiway Bravo. In summary, let's review our findings from the previous 3 episodes. In all scenarios, the Cessna 162 Skycatcher and the Cessna 172N have no problem making runway 34 left or taxiway Bravo, regardless of headwind. For the Cessna 172S, we need at least 10 to 15 knots of headwind in order to make runway 34 left, and you can make taxiway Bravo in all configurations, but you need to make sure that you are turning with a 45-degree bank angle to be able to make the taxiway with no wind. For the Piper PA-28 180 or the Cherokee 180, we cannot make either taxiway Bravo or runway 34 left in a no-wind scenario. In order to make taxiway Bravo, you need at least 5 knots of headwind, and you need at least 10 to 15 knots of headwind in order to make runway 34 left. For the Piper PA-28 181 or the Archer 2, in a no-wind scenario we can only make taxiway Bravo, and we need at least 5 to 10 knots of headwind in order to make runway 34 left. So if you're taking off runway 16 left at Manassas Regional Airport in any of these aircraft, I hope this video was useful to you and can inform your decision on whether or not to make the impossible turn to the right, to the left, or at all. Thank you for watching.